So if you have a $100,000 in capital in your savings or checking or stocks, whatever, and you have that money to invest in buying a business, how much of a business can you afford? What variables and factors should you consider? And how much are you going to earn on an annual basis? I want to walk through just an example so that you can get an idea of maybe what you could expect. Of course, every deal is different, valuations are different, what you can find a deal for, but includes a lot of rules of thumb that you can kind of use as you start your search. So if you have $100,000, typically a business is going to need about 10% down in order to buy the business. So you might be thinking, oh, if I've got 100,000, I can afford a $1 million business. But if that is all the money you have, typically a bank or even yourself, like you wouldn't want to put every single dollar that you have into the business, because what if things go wrong? What if things dip a little bit? What if, so many what ifs. Typically, I've heard from some of my bankers that they want to see that you have kind of equal the amount for your down payment that you have sort of tucked away in reserves. So it's not an exact number, of course, but if you have $100,000, they might want to see you spending $50,000 of that to buy a business, and then have $50,000 kind of tucked away in reserves. So, at a really, really high level, you might say like, okay, 500,000. If you've got 100,000, $500,000 business. But I think that you could go up a little bit more than that if you have other sources and access to capital that we'll talk about at the end. So let's walk through if you were to buy a business for $630,000. In this example, if a business is for sale for $630,000, or that's what you can acquire it for, and you can buy it at a 2.8 multiple, which is the average multiple according to the IBBA, for businesses that sell between a sales price of $500,000 and $1 million. So the multiples get higher as the business sale price gets higher. So, $1 to $2 million businesses are typically selling at a 3 multiple of SDE. Once you get higher at $2 million to $5 million businesses, they're looking at those businesses not on SDE, but they're looking at it on an EBITDA basis, because they're assuming that you may have a manager in place. And then it goes up higher from there. But at this level of business, $225,000 in seller's discretionary earnings, which is just the profit of the business plus the wages of the owner, plus any interest or depreciation. Basically, like the total owner benefit is $225,000 per year to own this business. Then if you take that times the 2.8 multiple, that's how you get to the business purchase price of $630,000. So let's say you are going to put down $70,000 on that business. Probably minimum down payment is $63,000. You may be able to get away with a 5% down payment for certain banks if the seller is going to carry some of the loan and do interest only for a couple of years, or put it on a full 10-year standby. Bunch of different nuances, but short answer is, you kind of can expect 10%, and 5% down payment is like the very, very least that you could pay. So I'm going to put down a $70,000 down payment. That's the money that you're going to put up front to pay for this business. And obviously that's going to decrease your total loan amount. So your loan amount isn't going to be for $630,000. It's going to be for $630,000 minus the $70,000 you put down. And then you're going to, potentially have a loan from the seller as well as a bank loan. This isn't, required on all deals. Some banks like to see it more than others, but I think, I would say it's fairly standard for a buyer to negotiate maybe a 10% seller carry note or 15% seller carry note, just to give the seller some skin in the game, so to speak, for the future success of the business. If you're paying that seller every month for 10 years on a $100,000 loan, they're going to want to see that money keep coming to them. And so, if you have the occasional question come up, they might be more willing to help you out and answer if they're more financially invested in your success. So let's say you got about the seller to carry about 15% of your $630,000 loan. So maybe let's call it $100,000. And you found out that you thought that the working capital that was required for this business is about $40,000. So don't forget about working capital. If you're doing a loan, your banker should help you work through this, but make sure that you take all the working capital you can. That's my opinion, of course, because it's going to be harder to get access to money in your first 2 years of business until you have a track record. So the more capital you can kind of get up front in case of a rainy day, I tend to think is a good idea. Once again, these are just my opinions. But let's say that the working capital is $40,000. So if you break that down, $630,000 purchase price minus this $100,000 seller loan, because that's not going to be all paid up front, minus the $70,000 down payment, and then you're adding in the $40,000 that you're going to loan for the working capital, your bank loan would be for $499,000. And the reason that that is important is because for certain banks, the SBA has a rule that they're not required to put a lien on your personal property if the loan amount is under $500,000. So I know for sure Huntington Bank has this policy that they don't require it. I know Credit Bench has this policy. So if you're looking for lenders, reach out to me and I can provide my favorite recommendation over there. I would feel very, a lot more comfortable as a buyer, a first-time buyer, if I didn't have to put a lien on my house in order to buy a business. But I could still make over $100,000 a year, and I'm going to learn a lot, and clearly that's not where I can end up. I could buy multiple businesses, I can grow this one, so this is just the starting point. And so I think that this is really a nice level for people to think about because you're not having to take out such a huge loan. You're not having to do that personal guarantee. It's a little bit more manageable. And, it's still kind of a healthy annual amount. And then the next thing I would say is you're not, like we talked about, you're not going to want to put, if you have $70,000, that's all you have in your checking account or what you have in liquid. You wouldn't want to put all 70,000 in and have no backup plan. At least that I wouldn't want to if I were in your shoes. Because, sometimes things go a little sideways when you're operating a business. So having some reserves in the business account, I think, is a smart thing. I've always felt better as a business owner when I have a couple of months of business expenses sitting there in reserves. So, if the business didn't make money for a couple months, like if the expenses are $20,000 per month, I've got $60,000 sitting there in reserves. That helps me personally think about it. Also, if you have a way to get access to some personal reserve money, so if for some reason you couldn't pay yourself for 3 months or 6 months or a year, where are you going to be able to pull that money from to live? So I've always liked to, and this is because I'm conservative, I've always liked to have 1 year's worth of living expenses tucked away in some sort of savings or access to that capital. Even if it's not savings, even if it's debt, I can get access to. Because if you have a year to solve a problem in a business, then often you can figure it out. If you have only like a month worth of runway and then things in your personal life are going to start spiraling, that can be really stressful. So having that year where this business, the whole reason you're acquiring an established business is because it has that track record of success, you should be able to pay yourself $130,000. But if you're not for some reason, then having this money over here can be super helpful. So something that will cover all your bills, or, if your spouse makes enough money to cover all your bills, then maybe this isn't a concern for you at all. But if not, knowing what that amount you need to contribute, I think is really helpful. And one way that some people haven't thought about that you can get access to some capital on a more flexible basis is through your 401k. If you have your 401k that's kind of like owned or associated with your company as a self-employed person, you get to kind of set the rules for the 401k policy, as long as they adhere with the government rules, of course. But for example, I manage my 401k through a company called Guideline. And if I want to pull out $50,000 from my 401k as a loan to myself at any point, I can do that. And it is, a couple clicks of a button and the money's there in a couple days and there's no credit check. Like, this is my money. And so I'm just loaning to myself. The policy, from my understanding with the government, is you can do a $50,000 loan, like max 50,000, and you can do that loan once a year. If you did a loan and you paid it all back, you can't like do another loan in the same year. But so one time 50,000, and then it has to be 50% or less of your 401k balance. So if you had $60,000 in your 401k, then you could only do a loan of 30,000. So if you can calculate that for yourself, and then you can also find out if you have a spouse or a partner and they have similar 401k and their employer allows them to do 401k loans. Every employer gets to set the rules. Then you might have access to $100,000 in capital if you were to need it without doing any credit check. You could also consider getting a home equity line of credit before you bought a business. If you have a W-2 job, it might be nice to secure that line of credit so that if you need it, you've got it. Or secure a zero interest credit card, while you have higher income before you take on more debt. I've always kind of done like a grab for as much capital as I can before I go into like a self-employed situation. So that would be just one little tip on, how to think about having enough money in reserves to feel comfortable from clearly just one person's perspective. So I hope this was helpful for you. A short answer: you got $100,000, some access to capital in other places, buy a business for $600,000 to $700,000, and plan to have SDE of over $100,000. Ideally in that $130,000 to $140,000 per year, and just get started building your business empire as a starting point. So if you have other questions or want to see this in spreadsheet format, which I have, feel free to reach out to me or email me. I'm happy to provide that. And if you're a business seller, that's who I spend most of my time working with. I work with clearly a lot of buyers, but I take on listings from sellers, and that's how I make a living. And I have access to a pool of buyers, and I do these videos to attract more buyers and qualified buyers over time. But if you're a seller, reach out if you need anything for sure, or a buyer, and I'd be happy to help you kind of take the next step in your business buying or selling journey. So thanks for listening. I'm AJ Kohler, and you can reach me if you go to omaha.fcbb.com. You'll find my website there and phone number and all of that. So feel free to call, email, text me anytime. Thanks, guys.